Hello, my Bill 1000 Nation. How is everyone doing today? Hopefully everyone's having a great day. Alright, we are back with another Mr. Ballin. This one is titled, You'll Never Guess What Was Hidden in This Home. Not this home. That home. The home he's talking about. Not the home I'm in. There's nothing hidden here. Alright, I'm ready to get started. Let's get into it. Go ahead and turn them lights down low. Put on something comfy. Cut up with someone special. Let's get spooky.
A large, strange device was discovered inside of the secret room in northern England in 2002. And today I'm going to share the awful truth behind it. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the Like Button's house the day before their wedding and replace their dress shoes with Crocs. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our.
Well, how would that be offending? Crocs go with everything. Mr. Ballin. I mean, how mad would some of you ladies be if your old man showed up wearing a nice tux and some black shined up Crocs? You wouldn't be mad at all, would you? Be like, that boy's got style.
Weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. At the end of 2002, 36-year-old Boyd Taylor was single, he had no children, and he lived with his divorced father, Robert, in a small bungalow in the northern England countryside. In addition to living with his father, Boyd also worked for his father. His father, Robert, owned a small construction business, and so the father-son duo built houses in the area. While Boyd might have envisioned his life turning out in a different, more exciting way, he didn't seem outwardly unhappy about his circumstances. In fact, he seemed very cheerful, both at work and when he was at home. But despite his cheerfulness, his father, Robert, was still pretty concerned about him, because every time Boyd had some time off from work and was just at loose ends, he wouldn't go out with his friends. In fact, he really didn't have any friends and wasn't even trying to make any friends. Instead, he would just sit in his room all day and be totally by himself. Now, Robert knew his son was naturally a bit of a loner and always had been, but a part of him...
There's not a whole lot wrong with that. Some people, they just know when they're out there in the world with a bunch of other idiots, bad things happen. Same. See, I was like that for a smidgen bit of my life. I used to be, I don't want to say a troublemaker, but I used to be ornery, really ornery. Yeah, that's what we're going with. I was ornery. Yeah. And it literally got to the point where I knew the more I went out, the more I hung out with my friends, the more stupid stuff I was just going to get myself into. And as you get older, you realize it's not worth it. So I got to that point where my kids are like, my buddies, I don't know why I said my kids. I hear them in there moving around. That's probably why. My buddy's like, hey, it's Friday. Let's go to the football game. We got some beers and stuff. And I'm like, no. No. I want to, but no. Because I knew I'd end up getting in trouble.
Hoped that his son would just start going out and meeting new people, or at the very least, develop some sort of hobby that could occupy his mind. In late September of 2002, Robert was walking down the hallway of their bungalow when he passed by his son's bedroom door, and it was shut. And as he walked past, he heard inside of his son's room the sound of his son sawing some wood. And so he stopped for a second and he just listened. And when the sawing stopped for a second, Robert just knocked on the door. He was curious. He wanted to know what his son was doing. Boyd, instead of coming over to the door and opening it up and talking to his dad, instead just paused for a second and then said, what is it, Dad? What do you need? And Robert would say, well, I heard sawing and I just wanted to know what you were building. And so Boyd pauses again and then just says, well, I'm working on a woodworking project. And so Robert's like, well, can I poke my head in and actually see what you're building? And Boyd, again, without opening opening the door, just tells his dad very politely that he wants to be left alone. And so Robert decides not to push the issue. Whatever he was doing, it was his business.
Maybe he's trying to break into being a magician and he's like kidnapping women and sawing them in half. If I'm right, that's going to blow my mind. Oh, please let me be right.
So he just told his son that, hey, if you need any help with anything, let me know. I'd be glad to help. And then Robert walked away. Over the next 2 months, every time Boyd was not working, so in the evenings and on the weekend, he would be locked inside of his bedroom, hammering and sawing away at this woodworking. Away. Over the next 2 months, not to push the issue. Whatever he was doing, it was his business. And so he just told his son that, hey, if you need any help with anything, let me know. I'd be glad to help. And then Robert walked away. Over the next 2 months, every time Boyd was not working, so in the evenings and on the weekend, he would be locked inside of his bedroom, hammering and sawing away at this woodworking.
My eyes are playing tricks on me. The window above his shoulder, I thought there was someone standing in it. For just for a split second. I just want to make sure.
Over those 2 months, Robert would periodically walk down the hall and stand in front of his son's bedroom.
I seen someone right there.
Get his son to let him in to just see what he was up to. Not only because he just wanted to see what his son was doing, but because Robert was a carpenter by trade and so was just genuinely interested. But every time he asked to be let in, Boyd would very politely tell his father that he really just wants to be left alone. And Robert respected his wishes. In early December, Boyd approached his father and said, hey, would it be possible for me to take the next month off from work so I can focus on this woodworking project? Now, for Robert, this was a massive inconvenience. This construction business that he owned was really just he and his son building the houses. And so if his son was not going to be working, then Robert would be solo on all of his projects for that month. But Robert's thinking to himself, my son has finally found a hobby that he's really into. I don't really know what it is, but clearly he's invested in it. And so he tells his son, you know what? That's fine. You take the whole month. And if you want more time in January, that's fine. You just let me know. So starting that first week in December, every time Robert would leave the house to go to work in the morning, he would leave to the sound of Boyd in his bedroom, hammering and sawing and tinkering away at his woodworking project. And then several hours later, when Robert finally came back home, he'd walk into the house, and the first thing he would hear is his son still in his bedroom, still hammering and sawing away. When December finally ended, and Robert expected his son to be done with his project and to finally show him what he's been working on, Boyd approached him and
I don't think he's sawing people in half.
Said, well, Dad, I'm not quite done with the project. I need about 2 more weeks. And so Robert said, no problem. We'll talk in 2 weeks. So December rolled into January, and Boyd just continued to work all day long inside of his bedroom. Then on the evening of January 7th, Robert was home. He was watching TV in the living room, and Boyd was hard at work in his bedroom right down the hall when Robert decided he was tired and he was going to go to bed. So he stands up, turns the TV off, he leaves the living room, he goes down the hallway with his son's room on the right, and as he passed, he can hear his son at work, and he kind of yells to his son that he's going to bed, and then Robert goes into his bedroom, crawls into his bed, and falls asleep. At 3:30 a.m. the following morning, Robert is suddenly awoken by this incredibly loud crashing sound somewhere in his house. Robert's first thought was the chimney must have collapsed. That was how loud the sound was. And so he leaps out of his bed, he runs out of his door, he goes down the hallway, past his son's room, into the living room, and he looks at the fireplace, which is in the TV room, and clearly the chimney has not collapsed onto itself. And so he's standing there thinking, what else could that sound have been? And then he's thinking to himself, well, did I really hear that sound, or was that sound in my dream? And I kind of thought,
I hate it when that happens. Like you'll swear up and down you're awake, and you'll hear knocking, and you're like, what? This happens to me like all the time. Like I'll hear someone knocking on my door, I'll get up, I'll go to the door, I'll see who's there, just in case something happened to my mom or my dad or anything like that. And there'll be no one there. Swear up and down I hear it. It's gotta be a dream. It's gotta be. But you swear you hear it. I hate it when that happens. Because then you think you're going crazy.
That was real, but it really wasn't. And so just to be sure, he walked all around the house, kind of seeing if there were any signs of something big falling and crashing on the ground, but The house seemed totally in order. And so he walked back down the hallway towards his bedroom, and he stopped right outside of his son's room, and he considered knocking and waking his son up to see if maybe he had heard this loud sound too. But when he listened to the door, it was quiet inside, so he figured, you know what, my son's asleep. I'm not going to wake him up for this. And so Robert just went into his bedroom, and he went back to sleep. A few hours later, Robert got up and he left his bedroom. He went into the kitchen and he made himself some food. And as he's preparing his food, he's realizing that he doesn't hear the sound of Boyd working in his bedroom, because normally Boyd would be working that early in the morning, but he wasn't. And so right before Robert left to go to work that day, he actually walked down the hall and listened to his son's bedroom to hear if maybe he was at work in there, but he just hadn't heard him. But it was totally silent in the room. And so he reached down to the doorknob, thinking maybe he could just poke his head in and see if his son was on his bed. But when he tried the doorknob, it was locked. So Robert just thought to himself, okay, I guess Boyd is sleeping in this morning, and so I'm not going to bother him. And so Robert leaves the house, he gets into his truck, and he drives off to work. And then several hours later, he comes back to the house.
I have a feeling Boyd is dead. Okay, this is where I'm going with this now. The sawing people in half thing, that's out the window. I am 95% sure that he built like some sort of weird guillotine. Or one of those death machines that you hear about, and like I seen it in Futurama. Don't judge me. Don't. But like you set up this machine to do all kinds of weird things. You make this happen, and it goes through and does all this weird, stupid stuff, and then it ends up killing you. That way, you technically killed yourself, but you didn't. If that makes sense. The machine is killing you. Yeah, you set the machine in progress. You are still technically killing yourself, but technically, the machine is killing you. You're just standing there letting it happen. Bet it's one of those. Or a guillotine. One or the other. Come on, death machine.
At night, and he walks inside, and the first thing he hears is nothing. It's silent. And this house in the evenings for the past several months was never quiet. Boyd was always hammering, sawing, and tinkering away at this woodworking project. And so right away, Robert's thinking to himself, maybe he's done with the project and I can finally see this thing he's been working on. And so Robert drops his stuff at the door and he walks down the hallway. He goes to his son's bedroom door and he knocks and he says, hey, Boyd, are you done with your project? But he's met with silence. And so Robert reaches down again and tries the doorknob, but it's locked. And so Robert's standing there thinking, it's too early for him to be asleep. And so he yells out for Boyd, hey, what's going on? Where are you? I haven't seen you today. Come out here. Come talk to me. But again, it's silent. And so Robert's thinking, okay, well, when I pulled in, was his car in the driveway? And he can't remember. And so he leaves the house, he goes out to the driveway, and sure enough, there's Boyd's car. It's in the driveway, so he has to be here. And so suddenly Robert's starting to feel a little bit panicked about his son. He runs back into the house, and he just starts screaming his son's name as he goes room to room into the bathrooms and the other bedrooms to see if he's in there, but he's nowhere to be found. And so operating on a gut instinct, Robert just runs right out to his car, he gets a sledgehammer, comes back in the house, goes down the hallway, and he's standing in front of his son's bedroom door, and one more time he yells for his son and bangs on the door, tries to get his son's attention, but after once again there being total silence, he picks up his sledgehammer and begins breaking the door down. And
here's Johnny!
He manages to pop off the locking mechanism, the actual doorknob. That gets blown off, and he can push the door open, and he sees inside the bedroom is empty. There's just a bed and a dresser, and there's no Boyd, but in the back right corner of the room, where normally there was like this alcove, basically a segment of his room kind of jutted away from the rest of the space, almost like it was a closet, but with no door on it. Boyd had clearly built a wall and door over that alcove, kind of creating a sort of sub-room within his bedroom. And this door was shut. And so Robert immediately runs over to this new second door. He tries the doorknob, it's locked. He yells for his son, but again, after silence, he picks the sledge up and begins trying to break this door down. And after a few good swings, like the first door, he was able to knock the doorknob off of the door. And then he reached down and he pulled the door open. And what he saw on the other side of this door, inside of this little sub room, was so far from anything he ever expected but he just stood there in stunned silence. And then eventually reality kind of kicked back in, and he ran out of his son's room and he called the police. 3 months earlier, Boyd had decided he wanted to build this very specific device that was invented in 1789. Now, he didn't want his father to know about this device, and so he built that door and wall frame in front of that alcove specifically so he could build this device inside of this new subroom in privacy. He also always made sure to lock his main bedroom door. So for 3 months, Boyd began constructing this 8-foot tall, 3-foot wide structure inside of the subroom. And once the shell of this device was constructed, he began installing all of its inner workings. These included things like various lengths of wire and clock timers and a jigsaw, which is like an electric saw. And then finally, on January 7th, it was complete. So that night, Boyd blew up an air mattress and he slid it inside of the subroom right underneath this ancient machine he had built. And then after that, he went and locked the main bedroom door. He went into the subroom himself and shut the subroom door and locked that. And then he pulled 12 sleeping pills out of his pocket, swallowed those, and then laid down on this air mattress on his back, looking up at the inner workings of this machine. And then once he was positioned the way he wanted to, he reached over up inside of this machine and he felt around for a button that he had placed. He pressed that button, and then he put his hands over his chest and he laid there looking straight up until the sleeping pills kicked in and he fell asleep. That button he pressed right before he passed out from the sleeping pills started a timer, and when that timer went off, it would actually activate this whole device. And so several hours after pressing that button, the timer finally went off at 3:30 a.m. The first thing that happened when this device was activated is the jigsaw, the electric saw, began sawing this wire. Now, the wire had been very intentionally placed against the teeth of this jigsaw, and so it's cutting this wire, and this wire is supporting this weighted down, heavy, angular blade that's pointing straight down. And so as soon as this wire is cut, it releases the blade, and the blade that almost looks like this oversized axe head begins falling straight down this chute. And the chute aims the blade directly onto the front of Boyd's throat. Boyd's woodworking project was a guillotine, and that loud crashing sound that woke Robert up at 3:30 in the morning on January 8th, that was the sound of the blade of this guillotine crashing.
I mean, I did say guillotine or suicide machine, right? Well, I mean, technically, it is technically a suicide machine. I mean, he set it up to be one. So it was both. So I was right on both accounts. Choo-choo! Why am I so happy about this? Poor guy died. Fuck. I'm going to heaven. Again. Shit. This is not the first time this man has done this to me. Like, I'm over here making wagers in my own head on if it's a guillotine, a death machine, or something like that. And here I am excited. Yeah, he died by guillotine. Whoa! That's really not that. I should not be this excited. I apologize. A little bit. Still right, though.
Down and decapitating his son. Even though Boyd did not leave behind a note explaining his actions, it was determined Boyd's death was, in fact, a suicide, a very complicated and deliberate suicide. Boyd's father and other people involved in this case have come to the conclusion that Boyd was clearly showing signs of depression before he chose to take his own life. And so maybe if Boyd had reached out for help, or if there had been some sort of intervention, his death could have been prevented. And if you or anyone you know is struggling with mental health, remember you are not alone. No matter how bad it feels, there are resources out there that can help you. And so I've listed a number of them in the description below. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please sneak into the like button's house the day before their wedding.
Most definitely. Do not think you are ever alone. Because you're not. No one is. I'm not a guidance counselor. I am not a suicide prevention person by any means. but I am someone who listens. I mean, everybody needs someone to talk to sometimes. I feel really bad for getting so excited over his death. Shit. But I was right. Yeah. Not proud about it, but I was right. You gotta take your win where you can get it. Alright, but yes, most definitely. The numbers for Suicide Prevention Hotline, he just listed them. Let me take it back a little bit. Slide me over here. Alright, there are the numbers. If you ever feel like needing to use them, use them. Don't be scared, don't be shy, don't be embarrassed. By any means. Alright, y'all. I'm definitely going to hell for being so excited. Once again, thank you, Mr. Ballen. I'm an asshole. And I just want to say much love to all my new subscribers. Thank you all for subscribing, coming, and being part of the Bill for 1000 Nation, commenting the way you guys have. I've had regular comments from a few people, and I love it. I do. I love it. All right. Oh, want to go ahead and say this. If you've left a message and I do not respond to it in any way, shape, or form, YouTube has taken it down for me. There was a couple of messages I had. I did not see anything wrong with them, but it said that they was no longer available. I couldn't comment on them or anything like that. So I don't know. I do apologize. All right. Other than that, if you enjoyed today's video, think about leaving a thumb. Maybe 2 thumbs. You know, they're like Pokemon. Gotta collect them all. Yay! And if you are a fan of the spooky, scary, strange, or deranged, think about subscribing. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.